evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Sacramento County Planning Commission meeting. We do not have a quorum yet, but I believe we can still proceed with at least the first item, which is allowing for the workshop. But before we begin, I do want to make a couple of announcements. I had originally intended to participate remotely, but as you can see now that I am here in person, not just in spirit. And so because I was expected to participate remotely due to the just cause provision, that allowed the borough clerk to allow for folks, if they were interested, to also participate, at least for the public comments online. And so for both items, I will be asking Madam Clerk to see if there were any online comments or questions or feedback received from the public. So that is my first announcement. Shall we proceed with a roll call?
I will. So members Verga and Chair Borja.
Here.
And let the record state that members Devlin and Rockenstein, as well as Corona Sabagnano, are currently absent.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Verga, can you please lead us to the Pledge of Allegiance? Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. And Madam Clerk, if you could just proceed with our other announcements this evening.
The county fosters public engagement during the meeting and encourages public participation, civility, and the use of courteous language. The Commission does not condone the use of profanity, vulgar language, gestures, or other inappropriate behavior, including personal attacks or threats directed toward any meeting participant. Seating may be limited and available on a first-come, first-served basis. To make an in-person public comment, please complete a speaker request form and submit it to the clerk. Each individual will be invited to the podium to make a comment. Members of the public may send a written comment which is distributed to Commission members and filed in the record. Contact information is optional and should include the meeting date and off-agenda item number to be sent as follows. Email a comment to boardclerk@saccounty.gov and mail a comment to 700 H Street, Suite 2450, Sacramento, California 95814. And that concludes the comment.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Let's proceed with item number one.
Item number one is PLMP 2025-00202 is a 00202. Housing and Infill Zoning Code Amendments Workshop and Informational Workshop to discuss and receive feedback on a zoning ordinance amendment to streamline housing production and infill development. And this is countywide, and the environmental document is non-applicable.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair Borja, Commissioner Verga. My name is Jessie Shen. I'm your infill coordinator with Planning and Environmental Review, and I'm here to facilitate the workshop for the Housing and Infill Zoning Code Amendments. This workshop concludes the public outreach staff has conducted throughout the months of June and July with the CPACs, developers, professional groups, and housing advocacy groups. Throughout this workshop, I'll be summarizing the feedback we've received for each topic area. All right, so this amendment stems from a 2024 board workshop following an annual report on housing production. To meet the targets for the current housing element cycle, approximately 2,700 housing units would need to be produced per year. And for the first few years of the cycle, production was less than 50% yearly. Given these shortcomings, staff presented the board a range of regulatory and financial policy considerations at a workshop, and the board adopted a resolution initiating these zoning code amendments to streamline housing and infill development by maximizing by right development and updating development and design standards. There are 4 topical areas in this amendment. We have multifamily. These are 3 or more units on one lot. We have our neighborhood scale multi-unit buildings. These are duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, those products, and allowing those in the single-family zones. We have our commercial corridor overlay, which establishes a zoning overlay over the commercial corridors. And then we have administrative amendments involving changes to the administration of the zoning code as it relates to housing production. Both multifamily and commercial corridor overlay include accommodations for adaptive reuse, which we are defining as the conversion of existing non-residential buildings for residential purposes. And to inform these amendments, staff reviewed the standards of at least 8 other regional jurisdictions for comparison against the counties, and staff also reviewed frequently deviated standards in development projects and gathered input from the development community. Our first topic is the multifamily amendments. In terms of use allowances, we are proposing to remove the use permit requirements for the BP and RD10 zone. In that sense, BP, RD10, RD15 through 40 would be permitted by right so long as development complies with standards. The development standards highlighted on this and the next few slides are the ones that were identified as not aligned with regional standards or frequently deviated from. The first standard we have is minimum interior and rear yard setback adjacent to AG, AR, and single-family residential zones. Currently, that is 25 feet for first stories, 50 feet for second stories, and 75 feet for 3 and 4 stories. We are proposing in adjacency to ag-res and single-family residential zones, 20 feet for the first and second story, 30 feet for the third story, and then 40 feet for the fourth story. You can also do the step back for the third story to accomplish the setback. In terms of landscape screening for interior property lines, the current zoning code requires a 7-foot wide continuous planter with trees all around the interior property line, regardless of what zone you're adjacent to. We are proposing to modify that to only apply to AR and single-family residential zones and removing that requirement for all other zones. Minimum private storage area is 80 cubic feet per unit. We're proposing to remove that requirement. That's not a requirement other jurisdictions typically require. And then for minimum open space landscaping, common outdoor amenities, minimum private open space, we're proposing to consolidate that into requiring 50 square feet per unit. A developer can have the option of providing that as private open space, common gathering spaces, or a combination of both. In the design guidelines, we do have minimum width requirements for each of these features, so that ensures usability of that space. Minimum vehicle parking is currently based on number of bedrooms per unit. We are proposing to change that to 1 space per unit, as well as removing the covered parking requirement, which is currently 1 space per unit. Minimum biking is currently 1 space per unit and 1 space per 10 units for visitor, and we're proposing to revise that to 25%. So 25% of required vehicle parking, or you can think of it as 25% of the units provided. Minimum 2 bicycle parking spaces. All right. This amendment also includes a fully revamped multifamily design standards chapter of the countywide design guidelines. This new chapter reorganizes, clarifies, removes, as well as adds new standards. When the board adopted the resolution initiating these zoning code amendments, they directed staff to pay careful attention to the interface between multifamily and single-family residences. And so for that reason, standard 33A4 was crafted, and it would layer on with the interior screening for landscaping. And the way it would work is if you're adjacent to ag-res or single family, you would be required to provide the 7-foot planter with trees along that interior property line. And then to maintain the privacy of the single family residences, the design standard would apply if your multifamily building is 3 stories or greater in height and within 30 feet of the shared property line. A developer would have one of 3 options to maintain the privacy. They could add a second row of trees on the building side, offset from the row of trees along the property line. They could use transom clear story or opaque windows on the upper stories of the multifamily, or they could ensure that no balconies face these zones. We're also talking with developers on other options we can add so that there's more of a toolbox here, but all to accomplish maintaining the privacy of the single-family residences. All right. I'm going to pause and tell you the feedback we've received on multifamily since we just went over multifamily. By far, the number one topic of concern was the parking requirement. What we're proposing, again, is 1 space per unit. Most, if not all, the CPACs did oppose this. The reasoning was that they don't want to see project parking accommodated by on-street parking. They want a project to accommodate all their parking on site. They provided some recommendations. Maybe 3+ bedrooms require 2 parking spaces, or not changing the standards at all. We also did have support for the 1 space per unit by developers and housing advocacy groups. Their position is that requiring this is an inefficient use of land, let the market dictate what is needed, and they proposed removing the minimum parking requirement. A second thing I'd like to highlight is the topic of setbacks, height, and parking lot landscaping requirements. Overall, this received a lot of support from the housing advocacy groups, but they recommended being more permissive than proposed. Let me scroll back. All right, so they proposed not having a different set of standard when adjacent to ag-res and single-family zones, just have the standards for non-single-family and ag zones apply across the board, or allowing more permissive standards for the RD20 and higher zoning districts, and that would allow them to accommodate the required density on site. Okay. Do you have any questions before I move on to the next topic?
Actually, I do.
Okay.
Where did these suggestions come out of to make these changes? Is these basically what's being done in other areas? Is this driven behind any state requirements or state law changes?
These are not driven by state law changes, but I had mentioned that we had looked at the standards of about 8 other jurisdictions in our county. Some are more suburban and some are urban. And the ones presented for multifamily are the ones where the county was not in line with. And so that is what we're proposing, is to be more in line with our jurisdictional neighbors in terms of these standards.
And the rationale for the changes in the parking space requirements?
That was more of we wanted to allow the market to dictate the parking requirements more so. Generally, what we hear from developers is that it is 2 spaces per unit. That's what the Sacramento County market dictates. But we also wanted to make sure that some spaces were provided. So that was kind of a happy medium in terms of not removing the minimum, but requiring 1 minimum.
Has anybody done any kind of a check on how things are currently being constructed in terms of vehicle access in the new housing complex? We've got huge numbers going on all around here. And I don't know if anybody's gone out and looked and driven down those streets by any way, and had to deal with the fact that there's very little space when you're driving a car down the street because you got all these people parking in the street because the number of parking spots are not adequate. I mean, go right down here, and if you have a large truck, you're not getting down that street. So if you remove this even more, that's going to drive even more people on the roads to park on the side. I really would suggest someone go to these new housing tracts around here and just drive around and look, the ones that are obviously occupied.
Yeah, the city does not have a minimum vehicle parking requirement. They do impose a maximum, as in you can't go above a number that they set for your project.
Okay. I just see you creating much more of an issue with some of this, but I'm sorry. That's good. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Oops.
I think one comment, Ms. Chen, if you don't mind me interrupting too, and we also, Madam Clerk, just recognized that Vice Chair Devlin's here too, so I believe that establishes our quorum.
I have made that note. Thank you.
All right, welcome, Vice Chair Devlin. I think another question that I had, since this is a workshop, and I appreciate you listening to our feedback, so remove the city-urban boundary and just kind of look at the urban density areas that we have in Sacramento County, so not Sacramento City. Where the growth development and the growth that's kind of happening, and that overlaid that with the current regional transit plans. I think that would be essentially help us identify whether the market does support that or whether we do have the adequate public transportation availability that would therefore allow folks the alternative methods of transportation. Because if it's not there and it's like super dense, but it just so happens to be in Orangevale and there's no transit line,
Right.
that becomes a little bit of a disconnect. So again, that's just an example that I'd like to see. And thank you.
And Chair Borja, you're speaking to AB 2097, which is the state ledge, where it says if your project is within half a mile of major transit, and at least for the county, major transit would be defined as 2 or more bus routes with frequency of 15 minutes or better, operating during peak commute hours. We are a local jurisdiction under AB 2097 could not put minimum parking requirements on a project. And so we do that. We do recognize that for the commercial corridors, but for multifamily countywide, which is what these proposed amendments would apply to, we didn't go as far as removing the minimum parking requirements.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
One more thing to add to that, Chair Borja.
Yes, sir.
Todd Smith, Planning Director. The legislation Jesse mentioned is one of those. Obviously, we also have SB 79 that we have to implement.
Transit-oriented development. Right.
As Sacramento County is one of the jurisdictions that falls under the definition in that legislation, which is more specific to light rail and adjacency to existing and planned light rail stations. So obviously, we're talking countywide at the moment, which is a much bigger area that you identified in your comments. Orangevale, there's no light rail near Orangevale. So we're trying to take a fairly aggressive, but not overly aggressive approach on some of these topics, recognizing there is obviously a diversity of communities in the county.
Understood. Thank you, Director Smith.
Okay. Neighborhood scaled multi-unit buildings. These are going to be our duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. Duplexes are already allowed in single-family zones, most by right. Triplexes and fourplexes are a type of small-scaled multifamily projects, and this proposal allows these products in the RD7 zone by right, so 4 units max. Because the intent is for triplexes and fourplexes to look like single-family products in nature and complement the existing neighborhoods they are going to be sited in, existing single-family and duplex standards would be utilized, and single-family design guidelines will apply to triplexes and fourplexes, to keep with the neighborhood scale nature of the product. So the standards I have listed up here are existing single-family and duplex standards. We will be extending those to the triplex and fourplex product as well. Okay. All right. Okay, some comments we received on this topic. Again, it's the minimum parking requirement. Most, if not all, the CPACs brought this up as well. They don't want to see project parking accommodated on street. We would require the 1 space per unit for triplex and fourplexes to be accommodated on site, so not on street. But if a unit needs 2 parking spaces, 1 would probably end up on the street. Developers, housing advocacy groups support the minimum parking requirement proposed. Again, it's the same. Requiring it is an inefficient use of land. Let the market dictate it. And their recommendation is to remove the minimum parking requirement. Overall, housing advocacy groups support this. They recommend expanding this to the RD5 zone and not holding product to the density, just minimum lot standards. And what that means is to accommodate 4 units on an RD7 lot, the lot size would need to be about a little bit over half an acre. Most of our RD7 minimum lot sizes are about 4,000 square feet, so well under half an acre. If we were to not hold them to density, we would allow this product on an RD7 lot so long as it meets minimum lot standards and minimum lot width. And in the county, there's about 61,000 parcels that meet that criteria, just for some context. Okay, any questions or comments on neighborhood scale multi-unit? No, all right.
Ms. Shen, how might you define for a triplex? Would that be 3 units then? So
Attached.
3 parking spaces? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, our commercial corridor overlay amendments. All right, before we dive into details of the overlay, a little bit of background as to why this is being proposed. One of our general plan growth strategies is to revitalize the vacant and underutilized properties in our commercial corridors with residential, mixed-use, retail, and employment that are transit-oriented and compact. The general plan estimated that the corridors could accommodate up to 21,000 additional dwelling units, and that hasn't happened for the most part. For most of these corridors, the vision is predominantly residential uses of varying densities with neighborhood-oriented commercial or retail in service of the residents to create a livable and walkable neighborhood. There are several corridors that have special plans adopted to accomplish this, and the last one was adopted in 2012. These plans are generally outdated, and the variety of regulations across the plans has proven difficult to implement. We are proposing an overlay as the first step towards, 1, incentivizing development consistent with the general plan's vision for the corridors, and 2, modernizing and standardizing the land use regulations for the corridors. The overlay is in addition to the base zoning of the properties within the commercial corridors and will modify or add base zoning regulations. All right. With this project, the commercial corridor overlay is proposed to be placed on 8 corridors. We have Florin Road West and Stockton Boulevard South in South Sacramento, Auburn Boulevard North and Foothill Farms, Fair Oaks Boulevard West and Watt Avenue Central in Arden Arcade, Fair Oaks Boulevard East and Fair Oaks, and then Folsom Boulevard and Kiefer Boulevard in Cordova. For the areas within these corridors with existing SPAs, NPAs, or PDs in place, the overlay will not be put on those properties at this time. Future efforts will address the remaining corridors and areas that have special plans in place to clean up potential conflicts. All right. Okay. In line with the vision, the proposed uses are proposed to be prohibited in the commercial corridor overlay. Generally, the prohibitions can be categorized as 1, uses with substantial surface parking associated. So those are your RV parking, travel trailer park, your boat, motorized RV lease, rent, repair, wash sales, wholesale, and storage. And then uses that folks drive to. So your automobile service stations, your car washes, your mini storage. Some of the corridors do have the interim AC zoning, which is intended to allow auto-centric uses, but the AC zone does defer to the GC zone, which is the general commercial uses, so there are more permitted than just auto-oriented. Okay. All right. Modifications are also made to several uses to allow them in the commercial corridor overlay. We're proposing to allow single-family detached dwelling products in the commercial corridor overlay if your base zoning is limited commercial. And then we are testing out new use categories of night markets and food truck plaza and courts in the commercial corridor overlay. Some uses we also have modifications to some uses: wireless communication facilities, research, development, and laboratory, service yard workshop, and drive-throughs. Drive-throughs will need to be rear queuing in the commercial corridors so that it doesn't dominate the street frontage. As for development and design standards, there will be one set that apply to all development types in the commercial corridor overlay. This is intended so that development looks a certain way for the corridors. We generally want buildings to be pushed up and activate the street. All right, so here are some of the development and design standards we're proposing. Many just defer to the base zone allowed. Minimum density, we are lowering that in the LC zone to 10 units per acre so that if residential were to come in, that could be feasible. Minimum interior and side rear yard setbacks adjacent to AR and all residential zones, including multifamily zones, would be 10 feet for second stories, 20 feet for third stories. And we have a different set of standards for single family. I'm just going to highlight some of these. Maximum height is 75 feet, 7 stories. In terms of minimum open space, if you are proposing multifamily, it's the same concept as with multifamily. It can be provided as private open space, common gathering space, or a combination of both. And instead of 50 in the commercial corridor overlay, it will be 40 square feet per unit. As I had mentioned, we are not requiring minimum off-street parking requirements in the commercial corridor overlay. These are the areas where we will have the transit to support it. And then landscape screening still applies. If you are adjacent to AR or any residential zones, you will need to put in the 7-foot minimum continuous planter with trees. All right. Oh, sorry. Okay. Some of the comments we received on this one had to do with the prohibited uses. The general desire from the CPACs received was they wanted us to notify the property owners who will be affected, which the county is required and will do. Opposition, this is voiced from CPACs and developers. The corridors are already a challenging place to develop. They don't want us to prohibit, let the market dictate. And then support was also received from other CPACs and housing advocacy groups. Their reasoning was more active, walkable neighborhoods are great. It encouraging the speedy reconciliation of corridors within the SPA to put the overlay on. Any questions about the commercial corridors?
Any comments from fellow commissioners? I do have a couple of questions, Michelle. So would like to use the Florin Road West as an example. So sandwiched between there is a Florin Road partnership, right? It's a PBID. Mm-hmm. You look at the PBID membership, half of those folks, I don't want to say half, a good amount, would more than likely fall into the businesses that you are proposing a prohibition. It's almost as if, like, again, just workshopping here. We're creating a dichotomy from the city's perspective that, yes, we welcome these types of businesses in one area of a contiguous street. Then you stop, and then now you are in the county, I don't say right of way, but you're now in the county jurisdiction. Then we're saying that you as a business could no longer want here, right? And so I'd just like to encourage the staff and the team to look at that continuity, because in one end, we are hoping to foster development. I mean, adapted reuse is one thing, right? Because I went over to Florin right now on 24th. You look at the Office of Department of Human Assistance, you go back there, it's nothing but all of these either not used or potentially have opportunities of businesses. And yet we're kind of asking certain areas here to say, hey, it's going to be harder for you as a business to operate this type because maybe we have reached a certain amount of density of these types of businesses in these corridors now, and we want to incentivize other ones. But again, if for some reason or whatsoever, if that is a corridor, I don't know if there's an automobile corridor, I don't know, it used to be, right, in some of these areas where we touted that area of the county being this is going to be a regional place where people can shop, right? Now we're kind of like bifurcating that based on certain requirements. I think I just encourage the staff to maybe take a look because my fear moving forward in the future is that if we, let's just say that we overcorrect and then the market doesn't heal, we end up with sites that are not activated. And then now we're solving a problem of blight where we could have maybe not have a blight, but we could have had a working business there that could have had a multiple use, for example. And so, again, Mama said, don't let the pursuit of perfection be the enemy of good, right? And so I understand where things are coming from. I just, again, want us to encourage to just say, you know, are we consistent with maybe some of the neighboring PBIDs in there? Are there projects in the pipeline that may or may not be impacted by this additional overlay in the corridors? And ultimately, are we prepared to tell to this community members that we are okay to turn certain businesses away from applying because we want a certain type of business to maybe get there? And we would have to be able to tell a community member to say, yeah, it's okay to leave that lot undeveloped for X amount of years because we're looking for a higher scoring criteria of a business that meets our policy as opposed to just a business that's willing to invest there and pay their fees and be a good neighbor. So just my comment there.
Noted, and that is in line with the comments we received from the developer community, some which are multifamily developers.
Thank you. As you guys are proposing this, what's the perspective from folks over at like the Business Education Research Center, like Burke, for example, that has like a kind of a more global, like other areas in the county that is hoping to increase more business activity, local chambers of commerce, for example, like do they feel like this could potentially be a
You know, we did outreach this package to the PBIDs and the chambers. We didn't get comments back from them. We did encourage them to attend the CPACs. Definitely, we don't want to overcorrect. We are hearing that, you know, maybe because our commercial corridors are so challenged, a straight out prohibition is not the right move right now. But, you know, we do have a vision for the general plan and we can move towards it, but it doesn't have to go so far as to be prohibiting a whole host of uses. And that is what we're kind of considering and hearing from during this process.
Understood. So perhaps not a blanket prohibition, but a case-by-case basis. Then we start looking at, okay, do we have nothing but a car wash corridor, and maybe that's not the right move, right?
Yeah. To be frank, we were hoping for more feedback on this topic. We just haven't gotten it. Yeah.
Understood. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Interesting that you're not prohibiting wireless cell towers in these areas. So you're okay to put a cell phone tower that community members might have a little bit of heartburn with, but no on an RV storage.
We're not prohibiting it. We would bump it up to a group 1, which I believe bumps up their use permit requirement. I think it bumps it up to a planning commission.
As opposed to, an administrative approval.
Yeah.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Don't let me stop you there. I appreciate it.
All right. Okay, I'm going to move on now to the last topic. This will be the administration amendments. All right, so our last package is this. It's the zoning code administration amendments. First is the proposal to require a filing fee when a CPAC appeals a residential project. The fee is $4,000, and that is the amount anyone pays when appealing. The CPACs are permitted a free appeal if there is community-wide interest in the appeal. Earlier this year, a CPAC appealed a residential map project to the board. The map was consistent with all applicable standards, and the CPAC didn't appear to have any real basis for the appeal. Because of this incident and a few different residential appeals last year, the board directed staff to consider changing the free appeal specifically for residential projects. Generally, about 3 to 4 CPAC appeals are received per year, and about half of them are for residential projects. These appeals to residential projects typically have not been successful upon appeal. And then for items 2 to 4, we currently have a special minor development permit, which is a discretionary permit with a neighborhood noticing component, and the planning director is the decision body for this permit. It costs about $1,300, and this permit allows multifamily projects 2 deviations not to exceed 25% of the standard. With this amendment, we are proposing to extend this permit type to single-family, duplex, and triplex, fourplex projects, as well as accessory uses, not ADUs, just sheds and stuff like that, with deviations not to exceed 25% of the standard. This is intended to address the one-off property owner who builds their carport a little closer to the property line than they should have or wants a slightly taller fence. Instead of requiring the $7,000 special development permit, it would be closer to $1,000. It would be discretionary, and there is a neighborhood noticing component. So to streamline the single-family deviations, the duplex, triplex, fourplex deviations. All right. Not surprisingly, and I'm sure you've heard, the CPACs, all of them across the board, oppose the appeal fee for residential projects. Some of the reasoning provided is CPAC members are voluntary, and taking this away dilutes the purpose of the CPAC and removes transparency. They recommended not changing it or to consider a reduced fee, so not $4,000, but somewhere in between. There is support from the developer and housing advocacy groups. Their reasoning is that it holds CPACs accountable. Okay. All right.
Can I ask a question real
Yes.
quick? Where CPACs have no funding, where are they supposed to get the money for that?
They would need to raise it on their own.
So they have to go out and campaign in the community to get money to appeal.
That or
come up with it personally.
Yeah.
Just like everyone else.
Well, I understand that for an individual or a group of individuals, but the purpose of the CPAC is to engage the community. Now, just because we don't like the fact that the community engages us more often than we think they should, shouldn't mean we make it more difficult to engage, for them to engage us. I mean,
That's not what staff is suggesting.
No, I understand, but that's the outcome. I mean, I've sat on CPAC, and I agree that sometimes people who come to CPAC have the NIMBY syndrome, and sometimes those CPACs don't necessarily stand up the way you would think they should. But do we really want to make it any more difficult to get people to come to CPACs or be involved in CPACs by saying the only way you can make a difference with your involvement is if you go out and campaign and get some money to make an appeal? Can't we change who it gets appealed to make it less burdensome on the supervisors? Then turn around and tell everybody, come up with the money out of your pocket if you don't like what we're doing. I mean, that's just, in my book, that's just wrong. Irregardless of what the supervisors have decided to do. I mean, having been on both sides of the CPAC issue, in a community that didn't want something, and then on the CPAC dealing with the community who didn't want something. I understand it's a messy process, but it gets the community involved versus just telling them, so sorry, have a nice day. You know, who cares what you say? At least that's my gist of it. I think you make a big mistake trying to make it more expensive or harder for them to have an appeal than not by doing that. That's the end of my prognostication.
Could I have, sorry, is it, could I just have like a quick recap of the current CPAC kind of appeal right / process?
Sure. CPACs, under the administration section of our zoning code, or chapter rather, they are entitled to a free community-wide interest appeal on a project that goes before them. They have to specify what that community-wide interest is, and they can pre-authorize such an appeal at the time they make a recommendation, an advisory recommendation to the hearing body. I think Jesse articulated how many of those we've seen over the last few years and how many of those are for housing projects. Most of the time, at least in the last couple of years, the housing project appeals are not successful. And we're seeing, and the one that really prompted this was one that was entirely consistent with zoning, all applicable standards. It was just a map that went to the Planning Commission.
Those appeals, though, go before this board, though?
Not always. Right now, appeals of a Planning Commission action go to the Board of Supervisors. That's the next hearing body up.
So they're kind of called by right appeal extends beyond this board. So they're not appealing necessarily. They're getting kind of a free appeal, kind of, if you will, or by right appeal of the decisions of this body to go before the Board of Supervisors.
As well as lower bodies. So actions by planning director, zoning administrator, subdivision review committee, those all get appealed to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is this body, the Planning Commission, and then decisions by the Planning Commission are appealed to the Board of Supervisors.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So to Commissioner Berga's point, we could look at changing the appeal body depending on where the initial approval was, or action was, I should say. It doesn't always, not always an approval, but ultimately a Planning Commission appeal, an appeal of the Planning Commission's action goes to the board.
Yeah.
But not all the actions. We've done
Correct.
done appeals that we were the final decision makers.
Yeah.
I
For the lower bodies, the Planning Commission acts as the BZA for the appeal, but any decisions that the Planning Commission makes is appealed to the board.
I'm just saying it just doesn't sit right by making it more difficult for them to voice their opinions. You know, maybe it comes to us and it dies with us. I mean, we just had a couple of them that died with us sort of just recently. So I just think it's better to give someone the ability to come to the city or county hall and voice their frustration and their opinion than just saying pony up or shut up. Thank you.
Perhaps, and Director Smith, thank you for kind of reminding us that a number of these were not successful as an appeal. Are we able to take a look and see where unsuccessful appeals were able to help shape some sort of decision and or additional requirement to the project or a conditions of approval? For example, again, we had a recent one where, yeah, the appeal was not successful, but I do believe that we were able to find a reasonable middle ground in some areas, not all areas. I believe that we were able to. So maybe the success rate is not essentially killing the project, but the success rate for the community is that, yeah, you were still able to shape, inform, or at least advocate the final product that went into the program, or final project that went on that did get the approval. And then the second thing is in lieu of a resource, so a cost basis, that I am with Mr. Verga, or Commissioner Verga, I think it's hard for me to just say that, again, we're creating a dichotomy of the haves and the have-nots, right? If you do have a project, ultimately it's reasonable to believe that you have the economic resource to be able to pay the application fees, and so vice versa. Maybe a mix of potentially lowering that cost so it's not at the $4,000 level, something a little bit more reasonable for community folks, but also maybe in addition to that, in lieu of an amount, maybe a signature gathering campaign that shows, look, it's not the $4,000 or the $1,000 that's worth it. It's the 100 to 200 valid signatures that perhaps the volunteers were able to say that this is representative of the district, so that, look, it's not the physical asset, it's the community sentiment that we're able to bring. I don't know if that is something that's amenable in lieu. Again, I'm trying to remove a physical access to money as the barrier for representative government. And so, and I hear you, Commissioner Verga, I did come from a CPAC, and again, I just, it's might be a little bit difficult when you start looking into like the Delta communities, the smaller communities that may or may not have the means, wherewithal, or the mechanism to address us as an organized body to just, again, cross a certain threshold. But again, that kind of gives you the skin in the game, right? Because as opposed to like a bank account, now they're having to use their weekends or not their working days to get to that skin in the game, for example. Sorry, I think we're still on that item.
And I have personally seen that feedback at a CPAC has changed developers' opinions about projects. And they've made, I mean, I'll use Antelope as an example. I know of 3 in the last 5 to 6 years that feedback from the CPAC, very vocal feedback from the CPAC, caused the developer to make modifications to try to address some of what the CPAC was saying. And to me, that's a good project. If you put out in the world to the developer that there can't be an appeal by a CPAC unless they can come up with $4,000, you're not going to get that back and forth. Why? The Barrett Ranch in Antelope cost the developer $1 million to change a route of a road to save one tree that's now part of the Sunrise Park and Rec facility. It's a tree with a fence around it, and it's now a park. That CPAC involvement drove that. Now, 4,000 or $1 million? Guess what? That wouldn't have happened if the community had to come up with $4,000, because the Antelope community wouldn't have been able to come up with $4,000 for that. So I just want us to be real careful which way we go, and we don't internally, cause issues we weren't intending to.
Yeah. I really do, I think, understand what the intent is behind this. And I hear my fellow commissioners, and maybe we need to kind of table this particular thing. I'm not a particular fan if there's going to be, changes to this. I'm not a big fan of, policy from the dais. But I do understand what staff is attempting to do. I mean, some of these projects cause undue delays. I mean, $4,000 versus $1 million. I think the developer would be like, yeah, that cost me $1 million, right? And maybe that wasn't the best outcome. Maybe that was just the concession. Maybe that was the path of least resistance.
It was.
And I also don't want to take away the appeal right from the CPAC, especially as it relates to this body. I'm not afraid of doing that work. I think that's potentially at least a minimal delay. But this kind of kind of blank check appeal, going through the Board of Supervisors can add significant delays to a project. And so can collecting signatures. I totally like the idea, but we would have to craft some sort of timeline around that and figure out what that number is. And that, I think, in and of itself would potentially take some time. So, I guess where I'm kind of landing on this is I'm not afraid of doing this work and hearing these appeals, but these can kind of continued objections to projects that really ultimately get approved because people don't like change. Change is difficult. Certainly there's NIMBYism that floats around. That does cause a lot of delay and ultimately can harm projects. Maybe $4,000 is too much. Certainly in some neighborhoods, it's probably not, right? Certainly in others, that is a cost prohibitive. But I, would also push back on their voices. I think still are heard. I mean, when there's a CPAC, vote that comes with the project, I look at it 100% of the time, and I take that into account. I mean, that's really, honestly, one of the first things that I look at is what are the CPAC doing this, right? It's kind of my short end of how controversial this is going to be. And, whether or not that they have that appeal, I think that this body and the Board of Supervisors is still understanding of what the issues that the CPACs raise are, and I think are generally sensitive to them as a whole. Regardless of if there's a full-on appeal or otherwise. But if we're unable to adopt this particular, if this needs a finer point, maybe this needs to be tabled for some time. I mean, I think if we're going to just maybe lower the appeal amount, I think that's something that we could easily do. But I think we're going to start talking about signature gathering in lieu of that's something that I think would require some additional time to really figure out.
I'm sorry. I can tell you for a fact that if you, and I do, go both to the CPAC and your supervisor's meeting in your area, the supervisor is going to hear about it. Whether they appeal it or not, they're going to hear about it. And if you happen to go to Antelope at all, you'll find out that there's a significant group of people out there who are very vocal and don't have a problem going to both. So it takes up the supervisor's time one way or another. The reality is if the issue is making the appeal more speedy and less burdensome on other parts, then just drop it in our lap and leave it up to us and end it here. And then you get the appeal, it gets to come to us, the people get to express what they're saying, we get to listen to what they're saying, and then, maybe like Chairman was saying, we help craft some different down the road. And we're not doing signatures, we're not doing $4,000, we're not doing any of that. That would be my preference.
Would this $4,000 cost is applied to all of the? Sorry.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Would this $4,000 cost is this applied to an appeal of a zone administrator or a lower level?
Yeah. Yes, and this is it's the same appeal fee for all appeals. And if it wasn't a CPAC being, if it was a private property or a developer appealing a denial, it's the same fee amount as well.
Okay.
And just to clarify, we're not asking you to make a decision on this topic tonight. This is a workshop. So you don't have to come up with something on the spot. And I agree, policymaking on the fly is not the greatest idea. We're just getting feedback tonight and wrapping that all up with other public feedback we've gotten.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So, I think, since this is, we don't have to make any decisions tonight, I think I would be in favor of, lowering that appeal amount to decisions that are made below this body. And, maybe it's going to be appealed to the board, just like every other, kind of cost. Every time you have to, items that go before the county board of supervisors are generally more expensive, maybe it remains at that $4,000 level to appeal to the board. I mean, I don't want, it causes projects delays, and it can be used, that delay can be used to not just extract concessions, but sometimes I think it can have a detrimental effect to the project, because the project ends up making concessions that ultimately aren't necessarily great for the project itself, but it's the path of least resistance. And so I'd be in favor of, kind of maintaining access for appeals to this body and kind of escalating from there.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate you guys having that feedback. So we're still on that slide at item number 1. And I still would like to, again, when staff brings back a recommendation, at the very least, maybe just take a look at the numbers and the data on the number of appeals that have been presented. I mean, I would really like to even look at the staff time and just kind of correlate what's copacetic. But again, I think the more information that we have when we are faced with the decision, so that we at the very least are not making the policy making on the fly. Meg, are we okay to move on from number 1? Is there any other feedback from the commissioners? There's a number 2. There's the allowing single family.
2 and 3 are, I can say it again if you guys would like, but that was really good feedback on the appeal fee. I think you guys have provided us some food for thought, and we'll look into what can be feasible. And we can definitely, if we do a signature or if we do something like that, we'll look into putting processes in place so that there is no delay. Or we'll look into those things. 2 to 4 was about the the special minor development permit, which is a permit we currently have. We're proposing that's currently for multifamily projects up to 2 deviations, no more than 25% deviating for the standard. We are proposing to extend that to single family, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, so that those less dense residential projects can also use this discretionary permit with a noticing component to it. Okay.
Understood. Go ahead, sir.
All right.
My question on that too, again, is if we can come back with that recommendation, the number of times that has been used, what's the current cost? Again, I think we're trying to draw a line in the sand, right? Because it would be at an administrator level as a staff approval. But I just don't want it to be in a place where the requirements are no longer valid, because we all know that we're just going to be looking for a staff approval for it to happen anyways. I understand that, again, these things are very minor, and for the most part, they're, again, supported by the neighborhood. But again, if we already flat out say that it's okay to have an exemption, then what's the basis of even having the swim lane and the framework to begin with? So,
if we do extend it to single family, duplex, triplex, fourplex, we would cap the deviation at 25% as well. Yeah.
Understood. And then I would assume that would be a copacetic to a little bit of a lesser fee.
Yes, it would be $1,300 instead of the alternative, which would be a use permit to the zoning administrator, which is about $7,000.
Wow. Didn't realize that was go from 7 to 1,300. Wow. Okay, that's quite a big. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments from number 2 or number 3? Again, these are just minor changes from both the single family and then modifying for multifamily.
Go in the right direction, down.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Okay, last slide. As mentioned, this Planning Commission workshop will conclude our initial public outreach for the project. Staff will be looking to the commissioners to provide feedbacks on the amendments, specifically on the topics we've received feedback on. You have already provided some pretty robust feedback on CPAC appeal. I'll mention the other topics that I'd like you to speak on. And then we plan on bringing in an updated amendment package for your recommendation vote in September. And I believe you'll have some public comments, but just a reminder, we'd like you to speak on multifamily minimum parking requirements, minimum setback height, parking lot landscaping for multifamily, neighborhood scale multi-unit, similarly, minimum parking requirements, whether or not you'd want to expand the multi-unit to RD5 and not hold the product to density, and then prohibitions in the commercial corridor overlay. Thank you.
Just on the parking,
Yeah.
In general, I'm in supportive of reducing parking because it helps with density. I certainly understand existing neighbors' concerns around street parking. But whatever is the right number for Sacramento, and maybe it even kind of varies by area, but it's hard for me to believe that, like, it's impossible or that difficult to understand, how many cars a 25-unit apartment complex in, fill in the blank part of the county, on average uses. State averages or, state recommendations or what one county doing. Those are great. Those are all points of reference, but, parking for, 100 units in Manhattan is very different than parking for, 100 units in a very rural area. And as much as I would love for, Sacramento to ultimately achieve density where neighborhoods are really ultimately truly walkable, I don't know how we really get there, without being able to master plan, large chunks of town. And we've, 100 years ago set out on this kind of suburban development path, and that's the path that we are on and that are likely to remain on. But understanding like how these, existing, does a 3-bedroom unit on average, have 2 cars in it or 1 car in it? I feel like we've got to be able to way of understanding kind of like our particularity of how, the royal we around Sacramento County uses what our parking needs are when it comes to, residential development.
Mm-hmm. What we've heard from developers is that it does come down to 2 units per bedroom surface parking is what the market in Sacramento County would accommodate. Not stacked, not podium. It has to be surface parking in order for it to be feasible, and it's 2 parking spaces per unit generally.
And that's currently what they're experiencing when it comes time to build and sell?
When they are proposing a project, because of that market demand, they are typically going to try to provide 2 if they're market rate. If they're affordable, they may not provide the 2 because it's a waiver you can get.
The reason I spoke up against it is when you look at the rural nature of this county, there isn't mass transit, and 2 bus stops in a given area doesn't mean you're going to have less cars on the road and less cars in the street. A perfect example of that currently in Sacramento County is the housing complex being built over in Antelope by the Lawrence Links Golf Course, 273 homes. Went through the planning years ago to the standard that you're talking about now. And if you drive down that neighborhood right now, there's a minimum of 3 cars per house, 2 in the driveway and 1 on the road. Reason being is because most of those individuals are going down either Grant Line or Alberta to the freeway and heading to San Francisco or that area and back. So they commute a lot. And that's a brand new housing complex that was developed under the old standards that is in the middle of an existing housing complex. And when you go down one street, you got plenty of room. You go down another street, you're in trouble. And so when you look at what's happening today under a standard that was put in place years ago, and then you talk about lessening the parking spots, and you're talking about plugging those housing complexes into this environment that we all live in, it has a significant impact. And, you know, what decisions we're making here won't probably pop up until, what, maybe 5-10 years down the road. Who knows what it's going to look like. But if the past is prologue, you go look at it, you'll see it. And it's just something we need to kind of keep an eye on. Because, you know, Antelope is not Sacramento. And Carmichael is not Antelope. And you plunge 50 to 100 homes in the middle of a vacant area in Carmichael, what's the first thing they tell you at any Antelope or any parking and traffic? First thing out of everybody's mouth, parking and traffic. Her appeal here the other day, parking and traffic. So just if there's a way to figure it out, I agree. Try to figure it out before we make it.
Yeah, I guess one question I would have for like the housing developers is, you know, is this a, you know, is this kind of like a chicken and egg scenario? I mean, if we build a 50-unit apartment building, it has one space per unit, right? Because that's the standard. Does that drive who lives there? Are they basically are tenants self-selecting, right? So they move in and they're like, well, we can't live here, you know, honey, because we have 2 cars or 3 cars and there's nowhere to park around here. So do people self-select into the unit, or, you know, is it kind of like they kind of shoehorn, you know, the 50 people occupy it and they just kind of shoehorn what do they change their lives? Do they self-select, change their lifestyle, or create a problem? It seems to be kind of like 3 issues, right? Or 3 outcomes. And that'd be, I guess, my question to the housing developers. Like, do people self-select? Do they modify their behavior? You know, we'll get rid of 1 car because we want to live here. Mm-hmm. Or they find some other solution that works for them that maybe creates a problem for, you know, nearby neighbors, because now we have, you know, 50 people parked at the apartment complex and 50 cars parked on the street in front of like nearby houses. Yeah. So that's what you do. Well, yeah, or, you know, that's my question, is like, or are they self-selecting into this? Yeah. For what, you know, meets their needs?
Yeah, I will say that staff's intent in reducing the parking requirement is to offer more flexibility. It is a minimum. You know, if the market demands more, we would think that a developer would provide what makes their rental desirable. And so if we go to the minimum and we offer the flexibility in terms of not requiring as much parking in a standard, letting the market dictate it, there may be more usable space to provide amenities for that development. It is a minimum. It's not the, you know, I think it's hard to think of minimums as someone would provide more, but our position is that, you know, you're laughing. Our position is that allowing this flexibility could, you know, maybe some people do change their behavior. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but like maybe there is a market for people who just want 1 unit, and then there are the 2 unit or the 2 spaces per unit people. But offering that flexibility can allow a developer to decide how to best use their land.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
Do you know where that's being? I could tell you where to go to see exactly what you're talking about. You go out off a baseline. If you go out off a baseline across from New Costco, what are they building out there? They're building all kinds of senior living homes. Single story, single car drives, small roads, mm-hmm. Senior living places. People that are moving there aren't the folks that are working. They're seniors. And they're down to 1 car. They don't have to go to work. And they want to be able to walk everywhere. And it's out by where I live. I drive by it all the time. If you go out there, Placerville's, I think, got about 8,000 to 10,000 homes going in over there that way that are the gated senior living homes. And they're designed exactly that way on purpose. I went and looked. So I'm at that age, I was thinking about it. So I went and looked, and they were out front about it. Car one in the garage, not in the driveway. Only a one-car driveway. No parking on the street, because you can't, because there's not enough room. Yeah. And everything's walkable. So that's what they're doing. It's just a matter of that doesn't fit most people's lifestyle who aren't retired. But they're building them.
Before we conclude this item, we haven't had a chance to talk a lot in depth about the setbacks and what that may potentially impact the types of neighborhoods that we are going to be promoting. I was encouraged to look at the Green Sacramento County, which is again supported by the county as part of the Climate Mobilization Task Force, and part of the things that they have in the sustainability dashboard is to ensure that you have adequate tree canopy and healthy landscapes. Do we, by any chance, by removing the minimum amount of spaces, setbacks, open living facilities, go askew of other policies that the county and other bodies in the county have established as a goal for us to not have monolithic apartments, to encourage just more housing, but still strike a balance of still having green canopy, healthy spaces, tree foundation things, right? So I'd like for us to be able to consider that as well.
So you're speaking to removing the minimum open space and landscaping requirement, which is 25% of the net lot area. And the reason we're proposing to remove it is because it's duplicative and is covered by other standards. So the other landscape standards that we require in terms of parking lot landscaping, parking lot shade trees, interior frontage landscaping, that's not changing. It's just when you calculate, when you are required to put in the required landscaping per those other standards, you meet the 25. Does that make sense? So it's like double counting. So we'll remove this standard, but the areas that you need to put trees in and landscaping still stay.
Okay, but that's the minimum requirement, right? But then if we look at like the Green Sacramento County goals by 2030. That's above and beyond the minimum requirement that we have in ordinances. Again, I'm just trying to figure out whether that might inadvertently have an impact to another pre-established goal that we have, because we're trying to increase tree canopy, right? I understand the minimum that you're going to be hitting there right now, but then come 2030, we inadvertently say, well, we didn't hit the canopy goals because we said you already have minimum trees.
How we're trying to achieve the canopy goals, I think for development at least, we're trying to put them in the right-of-way more, like the landscape planter between the sidewalk and the roadway. When our landscape standards are not changing in terms of if you have a front setback, if you have a parking area, you need to screen it with trees. If you have an interior property line, you put trees there. The design standard that I had highlighted will also, that's one of the options you could do to put more trees in. So we do allow for trees, but in the county at least, we're also trying to push more trees in the right-of-way where it can be continually maintained by the county.
Okay. And then the removal, if you can go back to that one slide, Ms. Chen, on the removal of the 40 square feet of the open space.
Oh, the private open space?
Private open space, common gathering space. So we're going to 50 square feet per unit can be provided.
Yeah. Okay. So the way it's framed now is if you have 10 or more units, you're required to provide a common outdoor amenity. And then each unit needs private open space, 40 square feet per unit. We are proposing to consolidate that to some extent and bump up the number of square feet. So it'll be 50 square feet per unit. You can provide it as private open space as in the form of a balcony, or you can do it as common gathering space, a space that's shared by all the residents. This also kind of speaks to giving the developer and the adjacent single-family neighbors some options. Not every developer wants to put up patio or balconies that look across someone's backyard, and that way you can maybe provide a more robust common outdoor amenity that's more usable rather than balconies overlooking someone's swimming pool.
Okay, so you still allow for flexibility for the developer to, at the very least, see what makes sense in that place as opposed to, okay.
Yeah, it's more context driven, but open space and like usable space is a priority of the county, at least for multifamily, and that's why we bumped up the number too.
Understood. Okay.
So if you go out to that place off of Baseline I just described to you, they're doing exactly what you just said. They are. It's all the tree canopy, all of that between the wall to the gated community and the roadway and the walkway is landscaped exactly like you're describing throughout that. There are several of them out there now, throughout that whole area. And the same thing on the inside as you're describing. They have more common space than the other. So it's being done just across the county line over here. So.
And forgive my ignorance on the chart. What do you mean by minimum private storage area? What is that requirement right
That's
now?
not a bedroom closet. That's like a space that can be inside your unit or outside of your unit for like storage, not a bedroom closet.
Okay.
So, do you want to explain it a little bit, Wendy? Or Matthew?
Good evening, Wendy Hartman, Principal Planner. What we frequently see happen is it ends up being kind of it typically happens on the balconies or the patio areas, and it's usually kind of like a storage locker. In your more urbanized areas, it's where you had multi-story buildings, they would put the storage in like the basement or in some other areas. So it's basically an area where folks can store excess stuff they have, sometimes their bike, things of that nature. But I believe for most of our county projects, we usually see it built into their outdoor patio or their outdoor balcony. There's kind of a enclosed area that they can use for storage.
So we're removing that. So for encouraging people to have an e-bike in lieu of parking, but it's hard for them to lug it upstairs on the third story. Mm-hmm. But we no longer have storage. And then on top of that, the neighborhood storage is now prohibited because we've removed or at least made it a little bit more difficult for certain types of storage in businesses. I just, again, I want to make sure that we're kind of considering different scenarios here because we're removing parking. So now we want them to have, and we already acknowledge there's not as much transit in certain areas. So naturally, maybe people might go into like e-bikes perhaps, but then it's hard for them to lug the e-bikes around. Now you kept the minimum requirement for bike spaces to a certain degree, but the storage part of heavier materials might be, I don't know, I'm a little...
The bike parking was also reduced, I believe, from our current standard. But a lot of our bike parking, the way that works is really for the short-term parking requirements. And I think what you're trying to get to, Chair Borja, is kind of more of a long-term parking. And I'll turn it over to Jesse because this isn't my project, and see if how they address maybe long-term parking.
Removing the minimum private storage area is that regionally, this is not a requirement other regions, like our jurisdictional regions require. And we didn't feel that when it came down to an apartment in Sacramento County, this would be the criteria. You pick a apartment in Sacramento County versus somewhere else. 80 square feet, yes, it can be provided for your bike parking, but that's not typically how we see it. We do have the bike requirements still. Our current bike requirements are really robust, really requires more than what our other jurisdictions require. Other jurisdictions typically require 10%. We require pretty much 100% right now. So we're proposing 25%.
On the bike parking, right?
But the bike parking is down more closer to the commons areas, not up in the apartments.
I gotta go check that out,
So you'll end up seeing what happened over there in the other county. They're now building huge self-storage things right next to that whole complex I just described to you. So, I mean, I understand the desire. It's just, and the chairman's right, I have an e-bike. It's about 150 pounds. So, getting it upstairs, it's not that good for me, and I'm sure most people it wouldn't be, but yeah, you're describing something that you see all over the place, and it's, I don't know what the solution to it is. You want to force them to walk or ride a bike, but you don't want to give them a spot to put the bike. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, at least maybe allow them a space to say in lieu of, I don't know, maybe we can figure out, and again, that's why we're
So the
kind of
minimum
workshopping.
bicycle parking, the type of bicycle parking is not changing. It's still like it either needs to be, I might mess this up and I might ask one of my nice staff to help me out, but it needs to be lockable or enclosable still.
Okay. So, sorry, I'm not, I understand.
Making the bike rack movement.
Gotcha, understood.
It's called lockable.
Lockable.
It's a bike rack out right by the walkway that you can put your bike on. So when you wake up in the morning, it's stripped and the frame's still there.
But the wheels are missing. Okay, well, now we've created a different problem now for the sheriff to figure out. Maybe we could, as part of the workshop, also kind of consider like some of these scenarios. Again, it doesn't have to be like a general rule, but maybe a combination of two. If we could feed two birds with the same stone, where we're getting to a point where the developers are comfortable that 80 feet per unit can be maximized for their best interest to include more housing. I get that. But perhaps as a give and take, part of that 80, I don't know what it is, 20 or 25, can be used for a storage for e-bikes that would, again, incentivize the use of alternative transportation. And maybe in lieu of that, you enter into an active transportation program where you either figure out a microtransit system, a neighborhood shuttle, and said that in lieu of you having to dedicate these amounts of spaces, that you now are going to create an economic benefit for you as a project to increase your unit size, that part of that cost that you're going to differentiate could be in an unactionable item that encourages other people to do the transit. Ergo, then you will be supportive of less parking. I'm trying to figure out a good kind of way, and I think there's a lot of examples of folks that are already doing that, but it's still... Again, it's not just a flat-out requirement. It's just allowing the flexibility. It's a combination of both.
I believe in our zoning code, we do allow reduced parking should one of these alternatives that you just mentioned having more bike or bike storage is provided. Like it's part of the allowing a reduction of vehicle parking at least. But we can look into the bikes and accommodate for e-bikes.
Understand.
I am in favor of eliminating that minimum storage requirement. I have to think that, project developers are providing what the market needs and wants. And if they're, if people moving into units, are needing and desiring, 80 square feet per unit, my assumption is that they'll build it. My guess is that not everybody, if you gave everybody in that unit 80 square feet, not everybody would need it or use it. And so it ends up just being kind of empty storage. So I'm in favor of removing that. I think that gives some flexibility to the market to, provide what's needed. Everyone's different.
Okay. All right, I went a little bit out of order, Ms. Shen, but I think we were still on your last slide, and I do believe that we have some public comment on this item. So
I will move it to the last slide. Oops, I went too far. Sorry.
it's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being so patient with us.
Thank you. Yeah, really
For your
appreciate
feedback.
it. Thank you. So, Madam Clerk, do we have speakers for this item?
Yes, we have received 2 public comments. And if you wish to address the commission on the agenda items, please stand to be sworn. And you can stand where you are. Thank you. Please raise your right hand, and the appropriate response is, I do. If you swear that the testimony you are about to give this board is the truth, so help you God. If you do not swear, do you so affirm? And when you go to the podium, please state your name for the record and the statement that I have been sworn. The first public commenter we have is Mark McKibben.
Hello, my name is Mark McKibben, and I have been sworn. So I am here in my capacity both as a resident of Orangevale and as a board member with House Sacramento. It's an all-volunteer local civic group that advocates for building more housing and specifically enough housing to help our region outbuild the demand curve. I want to start by commending Jesse and Todd and the planning team for creating this amazing plan. It's amazing in so many ways. This is a conversation the county would not have been having 10 years ago. So well done on that. We are thrilled, House Sacramento is thrilled as a group that this plan will allow for by right approval. I've been listening to some of the comments that you as a board have made, and the first thing I would say, when it comes to parking minimums, I would just offer a paradigm. Preserving parking minimums is less important to me than maximizing our collective moral and market power as a region. On the issue of CPAC fees, Mr. Chairman, you brought up Orangevale, where I live. Commissioner Varga, you mentioned senior living homes. As you're thinking and as you're doing research on this topic, I remember very distinctly, it was May 18, 2021. It was a Board of Supervisors meeting, and it was an appeal from the Orangevale Planning Commission that the board rejected. And it was on senior living homes. And I remember hearing some of the comments from the Orangevale Planning Commission. I remember hearing the board's response, and it was honestly, it was a decision I was very, very happy the board made, but it also, quite frankly, opened my eyes to how some of the appeals often from planning commissions are not always reasonable, in my opinion. So as you're doing your research and making your final decision, I would ask you to look at that. Thank you so much again to the team, and I very much support this plan, and I would ask you to support the CPAC fees and keep in the lack of parking minimums. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
Our next public commenter is Luz Lem.
Hi, good evening, commissioners and county staff. My name is Luz Lim. I have been sworn, and I am here on behalf of the Environmental Council of Sacramento. I want to say I really appreciate the discussion that you've all been having here tonight, and as a bike owner myself, I found it enjoyable to hear about the practicalities of bike storage, because I think it's important. But overall, I come here to echo, actually, the comments of House Sacramento. They're wonderful partners and great at thinking about the housing issues in reality throughout Sacramento. And I want to express strong support for the plan that was, or the proposed amendments that were presented here today. Particularly, we support the provisions that support adaptive reuse, minimize parking requirements, and support bicycle parking, active transportation, and common open space. I'm sure you have heard the environmental community really pushing back on sprawl development in Sacramento County and really asking the county to move forward on its infill development, especially in the regions where there are existing plans like the SACOG Green Means Go areas. And so the proposed amendments today really bring hope of long-awaited progress along this front. So we're really, really happy to see this. I just want to thank the staff, Ms. Shen, and for your work on this program and for the outreach work that you've also done to make sure that the community stays informed and involved. And thank you all again for your consideration of this plan. So we really look forward to continue engaging and making sure that this plan really helps Sacramento County move forward and get infill going in the county. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Lim.
If there are any members of the online who would like to make a public comment for item number 1, please do so now by raising your virtual hand. I have none.
Okay, thank you. I think that concludes item number 1. Thank you for Director Smith.
Sorry, just before you move on to the next item, I do want to acknowledge a public comment via email that I think some of the commissioners, maybe all of the commissioners, received. Thank you, Chair Borhoff, for forwarding that to staff. We have not had a chance to look at it. It's from a group called Smart Growth Sacramento or something like that. Anyway, point is, we will take a look at that. We have not obviously had time since we didn't receive the email initially, but we will take a look at it and evaluate how it blends with all of the things we're proposing.
Thank you, Director Smith.
I just want to thank staff for a great presentation and a very thoughtful report. Thank you. And for a lot of good work in that report. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Madam Clerk, are we ready for number 2?
Item number 2 is PLMP 2026-00108, Accessory Dwelling Unit Ordinance Repeal and to amend Chapters 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7 of the Sacramento County Zoning Code to repeal the Accessory Dwelling Unit Ordinance. This is countywide, and the environmental document is a notice of exemption.
Okay, good evening, Commissioners. My name is Matthew Jamama, Associate Planner with Planning and Environmental Review. I'm the project planner for the Accessory Dwelling Unit Ordinance Repeal Project. For some background, as you may have remembered from earlier this year, my colleague Emma James and I were moving forward with a package of larger amendments to the zoning code so that it can be in compliance with state laws passed between 2023 and 2025. Shortly before it went to your commission for review on March 9th, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, sent a letter on February 27th stating that the county must update its ADU ordinance to comply with state law or repeal the ADU ordinance so that all ADU allowances in our jurisdiction defer to state law. While we were well on our way with amending the ordinance to comply, HCD also made a revised interpretation of how ADU allowances are to be interpreted and permitted, which we did not account for in that drafting of that ordinance. This revised interpretation was also actively being enforced with findings of noncompliance for other local jurisdictions. In response to HCD's initial letter, we requested that we be allowed until the end of 2026 to amend our ADU ordinance. We got a response back from HCD saying that that was a quote-unquote delayed timeline and that we should repeal the ordinance immediately. We responded back in April, requesting until the end of summer to update our ordinance. So after that exchange with HCD, we went back to the drawing board. ADU law keeps changing, typically annually, but that's not all we have to account for. There's lots of regularly revised or clarified interpretations from HCD, like the one I just mentioned, that they are able to enforce on local jurisdictions. Our zoning code amendment process here in Sacramento County, as you know, takes about a year to a year and a half to complete. It also takes significant staff time and effort. After careful consideration of our options, we are proposing to repeal our ADU ordinance. This means that we will not have local allowances and standards and instead defer directly to state law provisions. To help our customers and staff consistently apply state ADU law, we are introducing a new appendix to the Zoning Code User Guide, which is a guide that can be administratively amended by the planning director. This allows us to expediently comply with state law changes and any HCD mandates without a zoning ordinance amendment. Repealing our ADU allowances, our ADU ordinance will have some ancillary consequences. First of all, parts of our existing ADU ordinance are less strict than state ADU law. For example, we allow 2-story ADUs with a discretionary minor special development permit and allow for 20-foot tall detached ADUs by right with increased setbacks. Additionally, we currently allow ADUs in more zones than what is specified in state law. State law mandates ADUs in quote-unquote residential and mixed-use zones. We do not consider the agricultural, residential, and recreational zones as meeting that criteria. To continue to allow for residents to have accessory dwellings in those zones, we are proposing to repurpose an older allowance in our zoning code for agricultural accessory dwellings, or AADs. We are proposing that for these eligible zones, up to 2 detached AADs may be permitted by right for each lot developed with a single family dwelling. I'd also like to note that there is a typo here on the second bullet point, second sub-bullet point that says ADUs. That should say AADs. AADs are proposed to be limited to 20 feet in height and 1,200 square feet in size, with the ability to deviate with a minor special development permit up to 30 feet in height or the size of the primary dwelling. I'd also like to note that this is a separate allowance from farm worker housing provisions, which is an additional housing type regulated by state law. Additionally, there are minor changes to definitions to bridge the gap between local and state terminology. For this update, we provided CPACs with the opportunity to opt in to optional workshop presentations. 3 CPACs requested presentations, for which we attended and provided presentations. CPAC members were also provided notice of this hearing by email and during regularly scheduled CPAC hearings during the staff updates section. Okay, for this last slide, can the clerk go to the overhead, please? Oh, better? Okay. Okay. So for this update, we prepared an addendum last week, which was in response to a letter we received from HC on July 30th. This letter is in your packet as addendum attachment number 1. The letter from HCD directs the county to allow secondary dwelling units and urban lot splits pursuant to Senate Bill 9, SB 9, on lots in the agricultural residential 1, AR1 through agricultural residential 10, AR10 zones within a census-designated urbanized area or urban cluster, provided that all other SB 9 requirements are met. As such, staff recommendation tonight is modified from the staff report that was initially provided, and that we recommend that the Planning Commission take the following action. Recommend that the Board of Supervisors take the following actions. Determine that the notice of exemption is adequate and complete, and adopt the ordinance amending chapters 1, 3, 5, 6, and 7 of the Sacramento County Zoning Code with the following modification provided in red line. Section 5.4.7.A.1.A shall be read as follows. Property is located within a single-family residential zone, RD1 through RD10. The California State Department of Housing and Community Development determined that for the purposes of SB 9 eligibility, the agricultural residential zones, AR1 through AR10, in census-designated urban areas may meet this criterion. This also applies to the interim zones in Title IV of our zoning code. So the R1A, R1B, R2, and A1A zones, which are equivalent functionally to our residential zones. The A2B, A2, A5, and A10 zones, which are functionally equivalent to our agricultural residential zones. And also the RE1, RE2 zones, which will be addressed for SB 9 eligibility formally at the 2023 Zoning Code update hearing tomorrow at the board. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jerome. Any questions?
I'm sorry, but I thought you said it didn't apply to the agricultural zone.
So in regards to the SB 9 provisions?
Yeah, I mean, just a minute ago, you were talking about how we were going to change an old existing thing to better fit our community, and they were in agricultural zones. And
Yeah, so the ADU provisions, which we're currently more permissive on, where we allow it in agricultural and agricultural residential zones, because we're deferring to state law, technically those provisions would go away. So it's basically, we're going to allow still accessory dwellings in those agricultural and agricultural residential zones through this local provision.
And the accessory dwelling is different than the ADU?
Yeah, it would be, so the ADU provisions are state law provisions, so now we don't have our local regulations. This would be our local implementation specifically to allow for accessory dwellings in those ag, AR, and recreational zones, but everywhere else will just go to state law.
Okay. I'm sorry, it must be late.
No, I understand your confusion a little bit, because then we also added in a provision specific to SB 9, which also identifies how frequently HCD is able to make comments on our code and why we're deciding to repeal the ADU provision. So, so there's accessory dwelling units, and then there are second dwelling units subject to SB 9. And so as part of this, in order to be proactive with HCD, as they were indicating that we weren't timely with the ADU update, we're kind of adding in this modification to address their most recent letter. So there are kind of two components tonight. One is the repeal of the ADU ordinance, which adds in the AADs for those zones that will no longer be allowed to have accessory dwelling units. And then the second provision that's specific to SB 9 is just so that we can cover that determination by HCD in as timely of a fashion as possible without having to come back through the whole hearing process again.
And they're both in agricultural zones, correct?
Correct, except that for the AADs, anybody that has an AG, an AR, or one of our agriculturally zoned properties would be able to have those two detached structures, detached dwelling units, which was an old provision that we used to have in our prior zoning code and just hasn't been used as often because of changes, because people started using the ADUs. I just lost my train of thought.
I'm glad I'm not
This
the only
one for the SB 9s is because even though we pointed out to HCD that we do not believe our AR zones are a single-family residential zone, they ultimately made a determination that if the property is in one of those urban designated census tract areas, and because we allow single-family homes as a primary use in agricultural residential, we don't mandate that they have to be in agricultural operation, that we have to allow them then to proceed with SB 9 if they're able to meet all the other criteria. And so there's other criteria that could prevent someone from still being able to do SB 9 in those AR zones.
So you're describing Rio Linda.
Significant portions of the county, Rio Linda being one of them.
Yeah, okay, now I
there's
understand.
Probably 6 or 7 different communities in the county that this would affect. We're going through a mapping exercise starting on Friday last week to really clearly show where this would apply. It's definitely not the entire county because of the way this HCD has interpreted this. It's just the census designated urban areas. Some of that is in Rio Linda, Alberta, but most of it is in Fair Oaks, Antelope, Orangevale, Vineyard community, and there's a few outliers elsewhere. But we're working on the mapping exercise now. We're going to be coordinating with the county's environmental management department related to wells and septic systems. A lot of these ag-res areas do not have public water or sewer, and that's a real public health and safety concern.
Yes, I mean, I imagine if you want to put an ADU in that area, that changes the whole structure when you have to deal with water and sewer, septics.
Yes.
Okay. All right, then I guess I'm tracking now. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I did realize.
Any questions? Vice Chair Devlin. Kind of a question, so bear with me here. Do we feel any concerns from HCD that by using and I appreciate the out-of-the-box thinking, I really do, because this is, like when you first read this item, you're like, my goodness, that county is like taking off ADUs. We just worked so hard. We even have ADU ready shelf plans to encourage housing, right? And now we're repealing ordinances. in order to comply with state law. But again, really, it's more so because we as a county aren't able to, laws are changing so quickly that we're just unable to adapt on certain requirements, and we wouldn't want to be in the awkward phase where we are irregular with state law because of certain, right? So,
Yeah, my response to that is it does sound, if someone were to read this without at least the title, without really understanding what's going on, they might be confused and say, whoa, the county's backing off from ADUs, which is not the case. I mean, we've spent a lot of money and time and staff resources to try to incentivize ADU use through the off-the-shelf plans. We are simply trying to be consistent with state law because we cannot be as nimble as HCD expects us to be with the process that we have to go through to amend the zoning code.
understood. Ms. Hartman.
And folks are still able to use those off-the-shelf plans. It's just that we won't have a section in our zoning code that outlines what you can and can't do that we have to keep updating every time state law or every time HCD sends us a letter.
Understood. So perhaps it's not just, you go to the Sac County planning or the applications. It's not that ADU ordinances are repealed. Hey, we're morphing into ADU guidelines to comply with, right? So again, I understand that part. And then the second question, are we at all in any issues with kind of being a bit more, again, outside of the box thinking when it comes to the AARs? Like, do we feel that that could potentially bite us back by saying, look, we're technically not following ADU requirements by going through an AAR exercise instead? Like, have we looked into what potential legal ramifications, or is the law silent enough to say, yeah, this little used tool that we have in an ordinance is an applicable way that we could still provide a balanced approach to these types of housing elements, potential housing elements in these areas?
At this point in time, based on current HCD guidelines and letters that we have received, their narrow scope of what zones ADUs are applicable to, we feel that we're fine. So at this point in time, we believe that we can have a separate category for them and that they aren't ADUs. I would say a little bit similar to, have the tiny homes already come to Planning Commission? You guys will be hearing an item in the very near future on tiny homes, and we kind of are having a similar issue with that, in that HCD doesn't want those considered to be accessory dwelling units, and so we're doing some out-of-the-box thinking on those as well.
Because their definitions are very black and white. I understand. Okay. And then one minor, I don't know if it's a recommendation, but as we recognize SB 9, is there a way to just make a very minor amendment to your screenshot there to just refer it as SB 9 statutes of 2021, perhaps just for specificity? Again, I don't believe that that's going to make a change in the vote, or maybe it's already understood. Maybe we pre-established that in the ordinance too.
We can certainly make that adjustment. That's what we're referring to.
Yeah.
So I can just talk to that. It's actually, if you look at the section it's referring to, we already have the statute of SB 9 inside of 547. So 547 in the title has a statute.
Perfect. If that's already referred to, just we don't want to be awkwardly next year. We're going to have a new legislative session next year. What if SB 9 now undoes everything that SB 9 did prior? I don't know. I'm not going to say that's going to happen. But okay, I appreciate that you guys looked into that. Any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners?
Happy to move the staff recommendation for this onto the board.
Okay. Before we take a vote, I think we have to ask if there's any public comment. And sorry, Mr. Jemima, does that conclude your
Yes, it does conclude my presentation.
Thank you very much for your time, and Director Smith, Ms. Hartman, for the questions and feedback.
Thank you, Chair Borja. If there are any members online who would like to make a public comment, please do so by raising your virtual hand. I see none.
Okay, that concludes our public comment, and I do believe we have a motion and a second.
And that recommendation passes with all members present voting yes.
Thank you very much. Now we're ready for item number 3.
Item number 3 is the Planning Director's report.
I'll keep it brief this evening. I think your next, let's see, the 24th, the next hearing, just 3 items at the moment, but 2 of those are appeals. One of them is a CPAC appeal from the Rio Linda community, not a housing project, but it is a CPAC appeal. So there is one non-contested item, should be pretty straightforward, but 2 appeals next hearing, so anticipate some discussion.
Understood.
Is that on the 24th or the following week?
The 24th of August.
And is the Rio Linda one on the slaughterhouse?
The Green Farm, yes,
Green
kill
Farm.
floor.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Smith. Item number 4.
Item number 4 is miscellaneous scheduling items, and outside of the attendance poll that I'll send out for September, I have none.
Okay, thank you so much.
I will be absent the 14th of September if we have a meeting that day.
I will make a note of that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And item number 5.
Item number 5 is public comments. If there are any members online who would like to make a public comment, please do so by raising your virtual hand. I have none.
Okay. And at 7:17 p.m., calling the conclusion of this meeting. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Recording stopped.